Saturday will mark 1 year from the day that an election captivated the attention of the world, an event that should have been remembered for how the Iranian people participated with remarkable enthusiasm. But will instead be remembered for how the Iranian government brutally suppressed dissent and murdered the innocent, including a young woman left to die in the street. Actions do have consequences, and today the Iranian government will face some of those consequences. Because whether it is threatening the nuclear non-proliferation regime, or the human rights of its own citizens, or the stability of its own neighbors by supporting terrorism, the Iranian government continues to demonstrate that its own unjust actions are a threat to justice everywhere. I want and hope for the people of Iran that the government of Iran will make a different choice. It can make a different choice and pursue a course that will reaffirm the NPT. As the basis of global non-proliferation and disarmament, a course that will advance Iran's own security and prosperity, and the peace of the wider world. Today's sanctions are yet another signal that if the Iranian government continues to undermine the NPT and the peace that it protects, then Iran will find itself more isolated, less prosperous, and less secure. Thank you. Barack Obama. 68th Session of the United Nations General Assembly Address. Delivered September 24, 2013, New York, New York. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Each year we come together to reaffirm the founding vision of this institution. For most of recorded history, individual aspirations were subject to the whims of tyrants and empires. Divisions of race and religion and tribe were settled through the sword and the clash of armies. The idea that nations and peoples could come together in peace to solve their disputes and advance a common prosperity seemed unimaginable. It took the awful carnage of 2 world wars to shift our thinking. The leaders who built the United Nations were not naive, they did not think this body could eradicate all wars. But in the wake of millions dead and continents in rubble, and with the development of nuclear weapons that could annihilate a planet, they understood that humanity could not survive the course it was on. And so they gave us this institution, believing that it could allow us to resolve conflicts. Enforce rules of behavior, and build habits of cooperation that would grow stronger over time. For decades, the United Nations has in fact made a difference from helping to eradicate disease. To educating children, to brokering peace. But like every generation of leaders, we face new and profound challenges, and this body continues to be tested. The question is whether we possess the wisdom and the courage as nation-states and members of an international community. To squarely meet those challenges, whether the United Nations can meet the tests of our time. For much of my tenure as president, some of our most urgent challenges have revolved around an increasingly integrated global economy. And our efforts to recover from the worst economic crisis of our lifetime. Now, 5 years after the global economy collapsed. And thanks to coordinated efforts by the countries here today, jobs are being created. Global financial systems have stabilized, and people are once again being lifted out of poverty. But this progress is fragile and unequal, and we still have work to do together to assure. That our citizens can access the opportunities that they need to thrive in the 21st century. Together, we've also worked to end a decade of war. Five years ago, nearly 180,000 Americans were serving in harm's way. And the war in Iraq was the dominant issue in our relationship with the rest of the world. Today, all of our troops have left Iraq. Next year, an international coalition will end its war in Afghanistan. Having achieved its mission of dismantling the core of Al-Qaeda that attacked us on September 11th. For the United States, these new circumstances have also meant shifting away from a perpetual war footing. Beyond bringing our troops home, we have limited the use of drones so they target only those who pose a continuing imminent threat to the United States where capture is not feasible. And there is a near certainty of no civilian casualties. We're transferring detainees to other countries and trying terrorists in courts of law. While working diligently to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. And just as we reviewed how we deploy our extraordinary military capabilities in a way that lives up to our ideals. We've begun to review the way that we gather intelligence. so that we properly balance the legitimate security concerns of our citizens and allies with the privacy concerns that all people share. As a result of this work, and cooperation with allies and partners, the world is more stable than it was 5 years ago. But even a glance at today's headlines indicates that dangers remain. In Kenya, we've seen terrorists target innocent civilians in a crowded shopping mall. And our hearts go out to the families of those who have been affected. In Pakistan, nearly 100 people were recently killed by suicide bombers outside a church. In Iraq, killings and car bombs continue to be a terrible part of life. And meanwhile, Al-Qaeda has splintered into regional networks and militias. Which doesn't give them the capacity at this point to carry out attacks like 9/11, but does pose serious threats to governments and diplomats, businesses, and civilians all across the globe. Just as significantly, the convulsions in the Middle East and North Africa have laid bare deep divisions within societies. As an old order is upended and people grapple with what comes next. Peaceful movements have too often been answered by violence from those resisting change. And from extremists trying to hijack change. Sectarian conflict has re-emerged. And the potential spread of weapons of mass destruction continues to cast a shadow over the pursuit of peace. Nowhere have we seen these trends converge more powerfully than in Syria. There, peaceful protests against an authoritarian regime were met with repression and slaughter. In the face of such carnage, many retreated to their sectarian identity Alawite and Sunni. Christian and Kurd, and the situation spiraled into civil war. The international community recognized the stakes early on. But our response has not matched the scale of the challenge. Aid cannot keep pace with the suffering of the wounded and displaced. A peace. Process is stillborn. America and others have worked to bolster the moderate opposition. But extremist groups have still taken root to exploit the crisis. Assad's traditional allies have propped him up, citing principles of sovereignty to shield his regime. And on August 21, the regime used chemical weapons in an attack that killed more than 1,000 people. Including hundreds of children. Now, the crisis in Syria, and the destabilization of the region. Goes to the heart of broader challenges that the international community must now confront. How should we respond to conflicts in the Middle East and North? Africa conflicts between countries, but also conflicts within them. How do we address the choice of standing callously by while children are subjected to nerve gas? Or embroiling ourselves in someone else's civil war? What is the role of force in resolving disputes that threaten the stability? Of the region and undermine all basic standards of civilized conduct? What is the role of the United Nations and international law in meeting cries for justice? Today, I want to outline where the United States of America stands on these issues. With respect to Syria, we believe that as a starting point, the international community must enforce the ban on chemical weapons. When I stated my willingness to order a limited strike against the Assad regime, in response to the brazen use of chemical weapons, I did not do so lightly. I did so because I believe it is in the security interest of the United States and in the interest of the world to meaningfully enforce a prohibition whose origins are older than the United Nations itself. The ban against the use of chemical weapons, even in war, has been agreed to by 98% of humanity. It is strengthened by the searing memories of soldiers suffocating in the trenches. Jews slaughtered in gas chambers, Iranians poisoned in the many tens of thousands. The evidence is overwhelming that the Assad regime used such weapons on August 21. U. And inspectors gave a clear accounting that advanced rockets fired large quantities of sarin gas at civilians. These rockets were fired from a regime-controlled neighborhood, and landed in opposition neighborhoods. It's an insult to human reason and to the legitimacy of this institution. To suggest that anyone other than the regime carried out this attack. Now, I know that in the immediate aftermath of the attack there were those who questioned the legitimacy of even a limited strike in the absence of a clear mandate from the Security Council. But without a credible military threat, the Security Council had demonstrated no inclination to act at all. However, as I've discussed with President Putin for over a year, most recently in St. Petersburg, my preference has always been a diplomatic resolution to this issue. And in the past several weeks, the United States, Russia, and our allies have reached an agreement to place Syria's chemical weapons under international control, and then to destroy them.